All right.
We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
Welcome 80-20 Baseball community. Coach Bo here. We have part 2 of our interview with Coach Jared SLATER coming right at you. In part 2, which you are going to hear in just a second, Jared is going to discuss how to best choose a strength and conditioning coach for your kid, for your team, and Jared is also going to share out his thoughts on should kids do in-season strength training, and if so, how should they do it? Those are 2 of the main things that Jared is going to discuss. But first, he is going to finish up our discussion from part 1 about the core, the body's core, the torso, etc. And I'll let him finish up that topic. So without further ado, let's dive right into part 2.
The easy way to explain what the core is, if you were to basically look at a skeleton, but you have the muscles on there, it's pretty much going to include your glutes, your basically where your stomach is, and then the sides of your torso and your lower back. That's like the most basic way to explain without explaining the muscles. If you want to go into the muscles, you have your transverse abdominis, your multifidus, internal, external obliques, erector spinae, diaphragm, pelvic floor, and abs. That's obviously the scientific version of it. But what I would describe bracing your core is squeezing your abs as hard as possible. That would be the best way to describe bracing your core. And if you really want to brace your core, you would squeeze your glutes too, squeeze your abs, and you're just going to feel this tightness, and that pressure and tightness is what is core bracing. So core bracing is squeezing the muscles that involve your core, your abs for the most part, squeezing that as hard as you can. And you're going to notice when you do that, you're going to feel other things engage, but that's what core bracing is. Core bracing is squeezing your abs as hard as you possibly can.
Okay, big fan of what you're saying. I didn't know the terminology. I felt it over the years doing so many things. Just yesterday, I was on the treadmill in the garage, and I know I should be out walking on the street, but during the winter here in Boise, it's been a little cold. It's been the coldest winter in terms of days under 60 in Boise since like 1899. They've had record snowfalls here. So anyways, during the winter, I have a treadmill and I have a couple different bikes, and I have a bike up on one of those. I don't know what they call it, but I put it up on the spinner thing. So it has resistance. It's basically like an exercise bike. But anyways, I was doing some reverse walking on the treadmills, and yesterday I was bracing my core because I felt like my core as a taller person, I start to slouch, my core gets loose, and I don't activate my core like you're saying. And speaking of that, what you said is interesting about it's so much more the core. When I took an anatomy class in college, I was just fascinated with how many darn muscles everywhere. And you're looking at the anatomy and you're looking at an actual body, a cadaver, and you're like, holy smokes, there's a lot more to this, a lot more layers going on. And I know we could get into that. That gets a little more advanced, but you think about like the abdominal muscles and how they all crisscross this, that. You're like, okay, that's not just a 6-pack or an 8-pack. There's a lot more going on down there, not to mention the back, the lower back, but the bracing the core. So I was doing this reverse walk, and I just realized I got to get my posture better. And really that just involved just tightening the core and keeping a nice posture, not slouched and not limp and loose with my core, and really tighten it and brace it. And then all of a sudden I felt my hips activate more. I felt my range of motion increase a little bit in certain areas, and my walk got better. It was harder, of course. It was the path of more resistance, but as most things in life, it was the better path to take. In terms of bracing the core, would that have been something I was doing? Was I bracing the core there?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So bracing the core, whenever you squeeze your abs, other things are going to turn on because the body works together as a system. So bracing the core is definitely going to turn on those other muscles. But going back to the spinal idea is that bracing the core, when you brace the core, what it does too is it stiffens up the spine. It causes your spine to be rigid, and we don't want a rigid spine. But at the same time, we do want our core muscles to help support our posture. So we have to know, like, walking backwards and squeezing your core is great to help support you, but then we also got to get the spine moving really well. And there are 2 guys who I, if you don't mind just shouting out, who I really respect when it comes to the spinal engine theory and this way of movement training. So there are 2 guys. The first guy's name is David Weck. Some people may have heard of the Weck method. I would call him as a pioneer in this field. He is really all into this spinal engine theory, locomotion. He's fantastic. Another guy who I've got a chance to talk to a bunch, he goes by the name Movement Mitch on Twitter. He has a thing called Move Pain Free. And those 2 guys, I think, are really pioneers players when it comes to the spinal engine, locomotion, fixing the way we move idea that I am bought into. But again, willing to be proven wrong. But this idea of locomotion comes from the spine. And even though we do need our core to be strong, the spine's got to be able to move.
That's good stuff. I know we could dive deeper into that, but just keeping the perspective of what we're trying to work on here in the youth community. Most all of the listeners are adults. We do have some kids. I get some emails saying kids are listening to this podcast with their parents, and that's awesome. I didn't think about that when I started it, but I really like that. We do keep it clean, and we try to talk about things that where I guess a kid could listen to it with their parents, their mom, their dad. So that's pretty cool. I do want to also make sure we don't get too deep in this. And that's one of the reasons I started the podcast was I would listen to all these baseball podcasts, and I loved them. And I go, youth baseball is nowhere close to needing any of this stuff. These are really smart dads and moms that are coaching and parenting youth baseball players, but they don't have this background. They don't really care to know it at this level. If they're already experts in something else, completely outside of sports or their business or whatever it is they do for their day job, but they just want to be really good as a youth coach. With that in mind, I want to keep it to the kind of those core ideas. One thing that's interesting about your background, Jared, is you work with sixth graders through high school athletes in person. So you see a lot of variety. So you're working with sixth grade, maybe 11, usually 12 years old up through 18. So a wide phase of lives, or I should say growth and body development and things like that. And you also program college players and you do stuff remotely too. So you really have a diverse background and building connections, building trust, building rapport. That must be a challenge for you, the variety of athletes. One thing that's nice about youth coaches is you're really just diving into building rapport with the 10-year-olds. I'm building rapport with this 11 and 12-year-old group or this 8-year-old group. It's a little easier because the rapport and it's the same age. The other thing you said, speed and acceleration. You're working on speed and acceleration. I think you're definitely onto something. Speed and acceleration in baseball. I trained a couple teams, a couple programs, high school programs, and it was speed and acceleration. It was speed and acceleration. Once they were warmed up and ready to move, I would just be speed and acceleration. Now, that doesn't mean they wouldn't get to top end speed. They would definitely get to top end speed, but we didn't spend a lot of time at top end speed. We spent a lot of time getting quick, accelerate. And those teams really had a lot of success in terms of just appearing to be more athletic because they were just accelerating, being quicker. And the 5 to 10% rule, giving kids 5 to 10% less than you think. So youth coaches, you go out there and you want to put together a little on the field training, youth fitness routine or still strength routine. Prescribe 5 to 10% less than what you think they should do because those kids are at recess. Those kids are playing at lunch. They're playing other things. Right after practice is over, they're going to be climbing that tree over there. So they're already doing things. I love prescribed or program 5 to 10% less than you think because they're already doing other things. And then you got into the core bracing and spinal engine theory. You got my mind racing on that one. That's pretty cool stuff. Thanks for explaining the core and what that means. It makes a lot of sense. It does add up when I'm thinking about it right now. And as you explained it. But at the end of the day, we do need to understand there are some things that are just more important, like fingers are less important or other things are less important. But I think the spine and the core, that's good stuff. So thanks for sharing that. And okay, so got another question here. And then we'll dive into anything you want to kind of add in. Again, Jared, thank you for your time with this. It's always great to have somebody like you on here with a lot of fresh energy, somebody who's willing to share out with the youth baseball community. That said, let's dive into the next question. This came up with an email just literally like an hour and a half before we jumped on this. I had a coach reach out some questions about in-season strength training for youth baseball. So in-season strength training for youth baseball. What are your thoughts on that? Suggestions, tips, risk, reward, because there's definitely some variables, but maybe you could just share your general thoughts on in-season strength training for youth baseball, risk, rewards, suggestions. This coach asked me if they should start doing some strength training during the season and having done really nothing before the season started. Maybe you could dive into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, this is perfect. On Twitter a lot, I like to pose questions, get people's opinions and do polls. And one of the polls I actually did not too long ago was I asked, given a team, would you rather, if you only had to say one or the other, only lift in the off season or only lift in season? So I have been explored this a little earlier, but I would say that in-season training is extremely important. Now, again, at the youth level, they're a lot younger, they're kids, but overall, in-season training is extremely important because in-season training is meant to keep us healthy. So there's a little difference between in-season training and off-season training. Off-season training, we're meant to get strong, get our bodies ready. In-season training, we're trying to maintain our health and if possible, get stronger. But The most important thing is to maintain health. Now, at the youth level, I definitely think that it's a good idea. I don't know about if they've started training before, if they're familiar with training, but even basic things in season are super, super good. Arm care, for example, making sure our shoulders are strong, making sure our forearms are strong, making sure even we can go with the lower body, our glutes, our hamstrings, making sure we're maintaining our strength through the season, because you do have a propensity to lose strength in season because you're playing and that's taking a lot out of you. But as for in-season training, highly recommend it. The place I'm going to be interning at this summer, VRX Performance, they do a really good job at trying to explain to parents why in-season training is such a big deal and how it can really help in their development. They work a lot with athletes and a lot with younger athletes whose parents are very involved in the process. Being able to explain to parents, hey, in-season training is important, and then also showing with data that, hey, you actually will get better training in season than not training in season. Season training is extremely important, especially at the youth age too. Again, going back to building good habits, get them used to playing and training. I think that's a fantastic idea. And I think it's something to also go over with your players, see where they are, see how they feel, because in-season training is tougher because you also have to go off of what they're doing. For example, you're not going to give the guy who's leading off playing shortstop, you're not going to give him the same workout or the same lift that you're giving the reliever who pitches twice a weekend or giving the starting pitcher. It's going to be based off of what they need and how much they're playing, because we don't want season training to take away, but we also want to make sure we're doing enough to stay healthy. I think in-season training, again, is such a good idea.
More focus on strength in the off season, or at least developing and building, than then in season. Generally speaking, of course, more of a maintenance, but there's definitely benefit. You definitely recommend it, but it would also be more of a maintenance type of component. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. And that's not to say just because you're doing maintenance, you can't get better. Maintenance can sometimes make you better because it keeps you healthy. If you're healthy, you can perform. Off season, more around strength, in season, more about health, but that's not to say you can't get better in season, because getting better in season is always a good idea.
You know what? You just made me think of something right now, Jared. Maintaining during the season. I do think, like you have said, that kids should start working on strength and conditioning. Shouldn't have to wait till high school, and definitely in college. Definitely shouldn't have to wait till high school to start becoming more fit and stronger and better movers and things like that. And it's amazing how many teams I played for all the way beginning of high school, all the way through in professional ball. And it was so much about preseason and off-season strength and conditioning, just tons of it. And then when the season came around, there was, I would say, half the time, half the seasons, half the teams I was on or programs I was involved with, half of them would just back off completely. And the other half would back off and scale it down. Geez, like 10 to 20% of what we were doing before. And you felt weaker. You saw the strength and other parts that are tied in, other benefits that are tied in, they'll start to diminish. Even if you didn't get any stronger during the season, but if you are at, say, a certain level of strength and conditioning going into the season, and if you maintain that in comparison to just saying, we're going to stop and we're not going to do it anymore, even if you don't gain during that maintenance with the idea of just maintaining, you're still going to be a lot stronger than those that just quit doing it or have a really poor in-season training routine. Yeah, while you might not gain, I'm not saying you shouldn't or you won't gain some strength during the season. What I'm saying is, even if you gain zero, there was zero improvement in terms of how much stronger you got, and even your quality of movement, it didn't increase during the season. You're actually gaining. You're gaining. It's like addition. It's like addition by not subtracting. So again, there's probably a term for this, some technical term. So even if at a minimum, you're just maintaining where you're at, or you slow the diminishing of the strength, it's still a heck of a lot better than just falling off completely. Does that make sense to what I'm saying, Jared?
100%. I completely understand what you're saying. I'll see if I can, I'm blanking on the term too, but I guess the way I would say it based off of how you're saying it, and I agree with what you're saying, is you're able to keep what you got in the off season and then build on top of that versus having to build back to where you were before the season.
Yes, just something to keep in mind. But I do think that continuing and at a minimum maintaining. So one thing that I find fascinating about this topic, and this is youth coaches, absolutely, this applies to you. Now, the scale of it is going to start, the baseline of it's going to start less. So the volume of exercises, the amount of things you're doing, more of the basics. But going into the season and having the approach of, so we were doing 30 minutes with the kids, or we were doing 20 minutes twice a week with the kids, kids, and then you back off. Maybe you back off a little during the season, but you stick with same types of exercises you were doing. You stick with the same routine, but you just simply cut it in half or something simple like that, right, Jared? Would that be kind of a general approach? Let's say you got a youth team doing squats, some push-ups, they're doing, let's say, some lunges, they're doing jumps, some of the basic stuff. Would you, generally speaking, of course, would you say during the off season, let's say they're doing 45 minutes of strength and conditioning, like 20 minutes here and 25 minutes after a practice there. And again, I know not all teams have this opportunity, but maybe the kids are doing it on their own as prescribed by the coach or as a team thing, but they're doing it on their own at their own house. Would you say just at a minimum, just scale the same types of exercises, but just a lesser volume?
So what I would say is definitely keep the same type of exercises, especially at a young age. There's no reason to do anything crazy. In my opinion, I would keep the same weight and then reduce the volume, like you said. So I would keep, let's say they're doing goblet squat with a 30-pound dumbbell. I know it's heavy. So let's say 20-pound dumbbell, you're doing goblet squats. Let's say you're doing 4 sets of 6 or 4 sets of 8. I would tone that back and I do maybe only 3 sets of 4, 3 sets of 5, but with that same weight, because your body's still getting the same stimulus from that weight, but you're not doing too much to fatigue the body. You're doing just enough to feel good. A good way of thinking about in-season lifts is you shouldn't want to feel sore after your lift. You should feel good. A little soreness maybe is okay, but you shouldn't feel, waking up the next day all stiff. Oh, I can't move. The goal for in-season is if you're scaling it down, do it so that you feel good. Because if you feel good, you play good. And feeling good in season is what we want. We don't want soreness in season. The soreness we can get in season is going to be from games. We don't want the soreness to be from weight. So I would say to coaches that are already doing weight training with their teams or training the conditioning with their teams, or even if they're just doing it at home, keep the same movements. And just like you said, just lower the volume. Do, 1 to 2 sets left, take off a couple reps, and you're going to be just fine.
Okay. Basic math and basic volume type of principles. And that makes sense. I like how you said, just try to avoid extra soreness. And anybody that's worked out, the soreness typically comes from doing a new level of resistance or a new level of volume. It's usually, and again, most of you, that are listening are adults. If you exercise for 6 months or a year doing the same routine, you probably won't even feel any soreness after. I'm not talking about having achy knees and arthritis and stuff, but just muscle soreness. Hey, I got a question. Seeing new exercises during the season, to me on the surface, doesn't sound like a good idea. Would you just at the youth level, try to avoid introducing a lot of new strength and conditioning exercises in the middle of the season? A risk or a reward on that? And I know I'm just throwing some stuff at you here.
I would say that in season at the youth level, it really depends on your athletes. It's really going to depend their training age. Have they been doing this before? I think new movements in season would be great without weight. So weight bearing movements in season. If you want to include new movements, I think there'd be a good idea to do without weight. So it's obviously just body weight and they're going to be moving and sometimes it might actually make them feel better to do a movement they haven't done in a while or they don't do all that often and they do it without any weight. As for the older population, different story, but I'd say with the youth athlete, in season would be really good without weight. I think you shouldn't overload them with new stuff. Don't be like, all right, today we're going to do all things you haven't done before. If you want to include 1 to 2 movements at the beginning, at the end of a lift with youth athletes, I think that's a really good idea, especially without weight. Get them moving, get them some mobility. Maybe it's a range of motion thing. New movements in season with athletes is a great idea as long as it's non-weight bearing.
Lowering the risk of things that could go wrong. I was just talking about my workout in the garage right before we hopped on this. I was doing some totally new movements, almost completely new angles, like I was saying, but I felt really safe doing it because I didn't have extra resistance other than the resistance I've been carrying around for a long time. I'm definitely heavier than I was when I was years old. After this winter, I think I'm a little even heavier than that. But needless to say, I felt pretty good about moving my body through some different movements, and I felt the risk was very low. One, it was slow, controlled, and there was no weights added to it. So I totally hear what you're saying. And I really like your old school, new school approach to this, Jared. It's one thing we talked about that. You have an old school, new school, and that's the whole idea of 80-20 baseball. Hey, there's old school stuff that works. And then we also need to be looking for the things that are better and optimizing what we already know. We need to build off the wisdom, not discard the old wisdom, but take that wisdom, really stick to the stuff that's tried and true, but also optimizing and maybe pivoting from some of that conventional wisdom that is being debunked, and that's how life works. So I really like how you're coming with that. And another thing I also want to reiterate before I get to the last question, And we haven't really hit on it a lot in here, but I know before we started the recording, a big thing that you just really a foundational component of your mindset and your approach is make the workout fun, make things fun, make it fun for the kids, make the warm up fun, add fun, try to add some fun. And how does fun look? Fun is basically, it's just look at the kids. Are they enjoying it? Are they smiling? Now, I always say this, when things are fun for kids, they're not always laughing and giggling. Okay. Because if it's a workout or if it's something that's pushing them a little bit, maybe they don't have the energy or they're breathing hard or whatever. And so it's not like they're sitting and listening to a comedy show in a chair and they're not exerting any energy. So they have all that energy to laugh. So youth coaches, you're not always going to be able to tell if kids are having fun with what you're doing because of their smiles and laughs, but you can just tell by the vibe. Are they having fun? Are they enjoying it? And that doesn't always mean they're going to be jumping for joy and screaming. I know, Jared, you're a big proponent of keeping it fun. Keep things fun. Keep the workout fun. It doesn't all have to be fun, right? The whole thing doesn't need to be a party. It doesn't all need to be fun, but they should enjoy it. It should be some fun to it. There should be some competitions that might make it a little more fun and distract them from the workout. I just want to touch on those before we wrap it up here. And those are some things I know you shared with me before, and I wanted to make sure that the listeners know like where you're coming from and why I was really excited to bring you on. And so anyways, with that said, let's get to this last one. I know we've taken up a lot of your time, but I really appreciate it, Jared. And let's dive into this last one. Is there anything that you'd like to add that you feel the youth baseball coaches should hear or know?
I think there's two, and I think they're both extremely important to know, especially at the youth level. So first one is, if you are looking to add a strength and conditioning coach to your team, make sure it's someone who has a reputation of development. So what I mean by that is not a coach who posts, oh, look at this college athlete throwing 95, 96. I got this pro guy, because they could have gotten that athlete when they were throwing 91, 92 and got them to 95. Not to say that's not impressive. It's very hard to gain velocity once you're already throwing hard, but to look for coaches who have, it doesn't even have to be, again, to be super helpful if they dealt with youth athletes, but dealt with an athlete since they were 15 and developed them from when they were 15 all the way to the professional level or to Division I college team. But looking for a strength and conditioning coach who has a history of development, who has a history of taking athletes, again, I use the term training age, but who are young and take them and guide them through to the end. They've worked with this athlete for 6, 7 years and they're healthy. Maybe we had a couple things here and there. You can't prevent everything, but done a good job at developing them, giving them a good base, giving them the things that they need to succeed, and not a coach that just deals with the super high level athletes that, oh, look at all these athletes that I have, because you don't know if they've had them before, if they were the ones who got them to that level, or if they got them while they were already at that level. That would be my first one. And in addition to that is to stay away from social media coaches. So stay away from the guys that are always posting about the next big thing and are always boasting about how their program is the best and about how it's their way or the highway, or I've been doing this for X amount of years and I've had these results and that's why I'm the best. Coaches that are not able to learn and not able to evolve their thinking, even if, let's say, they just happen to be right all the time, but coaches who don't want to listen to other opinions are not the coach to go with, even if they get good results, because if you have any questions to them, they're going to dismiss it as you're challenging them versus you're trying to understand them. For looking for a coach, those are my things. And the other one is, so everyone wants their kids to be really good and get to the top as fast as they can. Development takes time and everyone is on a different path. Everyone's development timeline is completely different. You're going to have kids that once they get to 14 years old are going to be monsters. We see it all over social media sometimes. ESPN will post about it, how there's this 14-year-old, he's 6'2" already. And that kid is so far ahead of everyone else that there's no reason to even try to compare yourself to them. Trust the process. Development's going to take time, especially at a young age. You got to give it a couple years and really you're going to start to see results the 15, 16, 17, 18, that range. That's why, again, I preach this whole idea of give them a good base, give them a good foundation to build off of. We're not trying to speed up and get to the top right away. Getting to the top takes time. In order to get to the top, you have to know that, hey, it's going to take time. Gaining velocity takes time. Getting faster takes time. Getting stronger takes time. Nothing worth doing comes easy. If we want to get to the top, find a strength coach that you like, trust him or her, and trust that it's going to take time and that it's all going to work out. Because if you are expecting results right away, no one you go to is going to make you happy, especially someone who promises results. Oh, within 6 months, we're going to get you to here. Great. Maybe they had 3 kids that did that, but maybe those 3 kids, their bodies were ready for it. Really make sure you find someone that you trust, you like, has a good reputation of development, and that understands that it's going to take time to get to where you want to be.
That is one fantastic message for all youth parents or parents of youth athletes, for any coach or any team you're trying to join. Love it. You want a coach that's focused on development. And, it's funny, as you were saying that, I wrote down, avoid coaches that overpromise. And then you came back around and reiterated, you're like, hey, avoid those coaches that promise you this, or you're going to get instant results. Avoid coaches that overpromise, or they promise just quick results. It's about the long game. And it's the development, and they should be development focused, not just trying to have them ready to be Justin Verlander on Saturday at Saturday's game, or have them as strong as Mike Trout. I'll have you looking like Mike Trout by the end of the summer. Avoid those coaches. And one thing I'd like to add to that too, Jared, for all the listeners, and this is really one of the biggest things that stood out when I was listening and following you and talking to you, is your balanced approach. And the same kind of vetting, that same paradigm when you go to listen to a new coach, there should be some balance in their message. Their message shouldn't be over promising. It should also be like, hey, here's some of the things we're doing. Here's some of the benefits. Here's the trade-off. We're focusing on this, but not so much this. They're not promising the world. And there's kind of a balanced message to it. You started off by saying the spinal engine theory, and you started off right away by saying, hey, there's a lot of strength and conditioning coaches and coaches out there that are really into this or buying into this. They're really starting to see how this could be something very useful in how we train athletes. And you also said, well, he turned right around and said, hey, there's also coaches right now that don't see eye to eye with this or don't quite agree. That is huge when you're dealing with anybody in life. I love that. And I think when you go to these coaches, go to a private strength and conditioning coach, that's not a bad idea. Just getting some one-on-one or at least an assessment from a strength and conditioning coach. That would be a good start. Just get an assessment and maybe a plan, or work remotely with a coach that can prescribe something where it's something that's hard to do. One of the biggest drawbacks or things that hinders, I think, youth athletes from going and getting strength and conditioning support and training is time. So they have their time for school, they have their time for other things, their family time, and then they have their time for their team and their practices. And it's okay, now where do I squeeze in the strength conditioning part? But having a coach like you, that, and again, if you are interested in remote, having somebody kind of coach remote, hey, reach out to Jared, and he's going to share his information here in just a second again. Or also at a minimum, get in and get an assessment. Just get an assessment from a strength and conditioning coach and spend some money up front, get an assessment in terms of limitations, just a physical fitness assessment that's better than your PE class is going to do, and go from there. There's definitely some things to do here. It doesn't have to be, I got to go to a strength and conditioning. Is Jared telling me, Coach Bo, Coach Slater, Coach Bo, are they telling me to go to a strength and conditioning twice a week or 3 times? No, find what works for you. Be creative with it. But the thing is, it is important to be stronger, to be a better mover. I love what you said about the foundation of what you think that coaches should be setting forth, the foundation, and just the foundation for youth players when it comes to strength and conditioning. So even if they don't get a lot stronger, even if they just get a tiny bit, or just maybe not even much stronger, maybe they become a little better mover, they're going to get stronger. But let's just say at the end of the day, when they're going into high school and they go into that weight room, they're going to accelerate. They're going to be able to expedite their results, most likely, and I'm generally speaking, but they're most likely going to expedite that because they're familiar with a lot of this already. They have a foundation. They understand some of the terminology. It's not new to them. While it's going to be moving up a step in the resistance and the weights, and some of the things might get a little more complex, their foundation has been set rather than going in there with zero knowledge of strength and conditioning, don't have any idea how any of this works. They know how to throw a baseball, hit a baseball. They know batting practice. They know throwing routine. They know how to run the bases, but they don't understand strength and conditioning. And just getting that foundation is so beneficial down the road. Okay, so Jared, wrapping up here, tell the listeners again where they could get a hold of you, contact you, where they could find you, and any parting thoughts.
Yes. Again, I'm only on Twitter. It's going to be @IAM_SLATER. That's LAERR. Again, someone took @IAM_SLATER. So I had to get the next thing. The last thing I would say is look for someone who understands that, hey, it's about the athlete. It's not about your recognition as a strength coach. It's not about how good am I? What's my reputation? It's about how successful can you make the athletes and the people around you. So that's my parting thought.
That was phenomenal. Well put. Awesome final parting thought. Hey, Jared, thank you so much for being here. This was a blast.
This was awesome. I really appreciate you having me on. I'd love to come on again if given the opportunity. This was a blast.
Definitely. Hey, thanks for sticking around for a lot longer. I know we talked about going about an hour, and hey, you just came on here and just gave out a lot of great information. So we just kept the thing going. But thank you for your time, and take care.
Awesome. Thank you. You too. Great to talk.
And that wraps up the conversation with Coach Jared Slater. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll tell you what, we'll touch on a few of those key concepts next week since this one's coming on that 30-minute mark, and I think that's always a good amount of time each week to digest, to consume. Again, I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did, and until next week, take care of yourselves, your families, your health, your close friends, and take care of your players, your kid, your team. Take this information out there and use it. And until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.